All right. Good evening, everyone. How are we doing this fine evening? All right. My name is Matt Kiesner. I'm one of the instructional designers on the curriculum team here, and sort of the expert on these middle school tests. I've helped write some of the mock tests and curriculum for SSAT and ISEE. So today we're talking about what parents need to know. So this is going to be a sort of parent-focused one for the SSAT and ISEE. So I appreciate everyone coming on in. We'll have a Q&A session at the end if needed. So feel free to throw in some questions on the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end. All right, there we go. So as always, apples are why. We say that when you change students' self-beliefs, you change their lives. And things we do, we'll be focusing on the test prep angle for this one and how to deal with these interesting, peculiar middle school tests. But we also do handle can't speak, academic tutoring, and at high school, middle, elementary school levels, and then executive function coaching, which is helping students with planning and decision making and organizing their lives and stuff. So for our agenda today, I did add a thing about the merger, and just I know that that's probably of interest to some in here, and I can share the updated information. Then we're going to talk about the testing options with SSAT and ICE. We're going to go into the specifics on both tests and talk about the kind of the question types, understand how schools use these scores, and have a better understanding of um, their purpose, building a testing timeline, and then a study plan. Okay, so I have a sort of a joke of the ISSATE, which is the is not a real thing. I was just having some fun. But what is real is that the company that runs the SSAT, which is EMS, Enrollment Management Services, and then ERB, which makes the IC. They've announced plans to merge and to do so before the end of this year, and that being the calendar year, not the academic year. And these two companies do have their own strengths. ESM has been doing the standard application online, which is basically the common app for um, uh, independent schools, and then ERB has a lot more testing within the school. A lot of independent schools use ERBs as a to kind of to determine proficiency at grade level, and it goes all through elementary, middle, and high school on there. So we do know that, but it's what's going to happen next is really not. It is not clear. They are looking right now to find a CEO to helm the new company, which is an interesting choice to kind of bring in someone who is completely from the outside to kind of guide two companies that have been, functioning for decades by themselves. Um, but what is important for parents and students right now is that both tests are going to function throughout the school year, and there won't be any sort of differences or anything that will change when and how these tests are offered. And it's quite possible that there won't be a change in the 2025-26 school year. Um, I think that's probably the safe bet. However, who knows when you have a new CEO and someone who really wants to make a new test or retire one of these tests. It's really unclear. And so there does not seem to be anything in terms of like a clear uh, choice where they want to keep offering both tests as is and just run the companies parallel. Have one test so that one is retired I don't know, or have like some sort of combo replacement synthesis test or something that's completely new. We don't know, and I don't think we will know that until certainly the merger happens and the CEO is in place and see what that sort of timeline is. So for those of you who might be like, in the educational space, this is definitely something to be interested in. But if you're the parent of an eighth grader or fifth grader or any other, and using the test this year, there's really nothing to worry about in terms of who or like what the test will be. So, but I think not saying something would you know would would you know would be weirder, and so I did want to out of the gate talk about because that's like the big news sort of behind the scenes, and I'm certainly very curious about what will come in the future. Mostly because as a structural designer, if the tests change, I'll need to update things and make sure that we still have the best materials to help our students. Okay, so um, moving back from the future into the present, I think like the first question is SSAT or ISE, like which one makes more sense? And it's important that like it really depends on the schools the students applying to. Some schools partner with one exclusively, and then other schools might partner with both. Some may have it where it's optional, some may have it's mandatory, and you're really going to need to look at the admissions page for every school you're applying to, because these are they're not standardized. And I also say that the SSAT and IC are very regional. There are definitely cities where the SSAT is very dominant, and likewise there are cities that the IC is very dominant. And it's important to kind of like if you're in one of those cities, like it probably makes sense for you to take the dominant test in there, rather than try to thread the needle and try to find a school that will accept the test is not commonly used. Because on the other end is that these schools are partnering with these companies, and so like they're like affiliate schools, which makes it a little bit different. Like you don't to use there. We're going to make some comparisons with the SAT and ACT for college admissions, but you don't find that colleges are part of they're not an SAT partner or an ACT partner. They tend to just use those as metrics, but it's a little bit different here in the private school game. So we'll start with the SSAT on there. And so there's the different levels here. There's the elementary level, and this is for students that are currently in grades 3 and 4. And the middle level is for students currently in grades 5 through 7, and the upper level is for grades 8 through 11. So essentially, the upper level is applying to high schools because eighth graders would be applying in, and then the middle one would be students applying within middle school. We'll be focusing mostly on the middle and upper because those are the most common. I do have, I think, a slide or two on the elementary, which it does have its own structure and limitations. So if you're wondering what the EMA was talking about, this is the slide there. So this is Enrollment Management Association Enrollment Management Association runs it. And they also offer like a couple of character snapshot, which I'll talk about, and like a common app on there. So there's different ways to take the SSAT, and I want to spend some time talking about those. So there's monthly paper-based testing starting in October. The October test has already happened. A student can take it in November, December, January, possibly February, depending on when the admissions are due. Additionally, there's a paper-based flex and benchmark testing. And then there's also the at-home option and a testing on a computer at a Prometric center. These would be booked individually, monthly, and then all the other options are something that they could set up as needed. So the standardized test dates are on there starting October. So you can take up to 6 times per academic year. That's quite a few times to take the test. I would not recommend that for most students. I think if you start counting from October into February, you're basically like you sort of max that out. But there are a lot of times to take the SSAT, and especially compared to the ISE, but we'll get to that later. So the flex test is an interesting one where it's a paper-based test, and it's called out because you have flexible scheduling. It can only be scheduled once per year. They did try an experiment a couple years ago where they had like seasonal flex testing. They're not doing that anymore. And so it's administered by a counselor or a consultant IEC at an arranged time. It is typically during the week, and so a lot of times students will have to be pulled out of school in order to take it. And then some schools will offer flex testing, which is essentially like the similar to the benchmark on there. which is the on the benchmark one. Um, that's basically what the school decides to buy the test for students. If your student is at the school doing this, you should do it. If not, then usually you can't require it, right? It's something that it's a administrator bias. Um, the at home one, this was their big push during the pandemic and kind of kept them afloat. Um, and they've gone from making it very like lots of start times and lots of availability of testing to actually making it basically another flex test. So as of this academic year, students can only take it one time at home. There were multiple options previously, and there was even like a point where you could take it multiple times per month. That's no longer the case. They've been kind of pushing away from that. And so what is at home? It means that they're using a secure program that has a live proctor. There's going to be a room check, so making sure the student doesn't have a calculator nearby or a dictionary or a tablet to look up things on the internet. And students, parents can be in the room for the room check, and I do recommend that because I think it's kind of weird for, if you have a 10-year-old who's someone on computers telling them like, "Show me your room" and stuff. It's kind of a strange experience. But obviously the room has to be empty and silent during testing time. Um, the structure and timing are exactly the same at home. There is a danger with this is that because there's not the they're all kind of running their individual timing thing. Um, that the students can finish a section early and decide that they're done. I had a student who was fifth grader and this was like the first year they were doing this. Um, and the test should take over 2 hours. And he was doing a flex test at home, and he finished within 45 minutes, which is way too fast to take this test. And unsurprisingly, his scores weren't improvements. Like it was, and he really couldn't handle the responsibility of saying, oh, given the option of being done and, and going and doing something else. That was too strong of a pull for him. Um, so it's nice to have that extra self-pacing. Once you leave a section, it is terminated, and I'm not convinced that, especially for younger students, that that's a good idea on there. Um, I guess I'll keep with some other comments I wrote an article on the Applerouth blog, but the at-home experience hasn't been great for a lot of students. We've heard reports of they use eye tracking software, so someone looks up and maybe they were just trying to think about math, right, and conceptualize something, and the eye tracking software like will flag it and say, keep your eyes on the screen. You're allowed to have your eyes here, and then a piece of paper in front of you. You can't look side to side. I've also heard of a test being stopped because the dog barked at home. And so if you're doing that home test, like if your families with other siblings and pets, and like it may be harder to create a test taking environment than you think, especially on a Saturday morning. Um, and that's with it only being one, being able to take it once, I don't I would leave it more as a last testing option, um, rather than like the first thing, or putting all your cards in there because it just hasn't been a good experience. There also been lots of delays, getting things started. So I would I would lean towards if all possible paper-based testing on there. And likewise, there's the Prometric one. Um, so the difference on here is so Prometric they have testing centers. They will offer all kinds of tests for mostly for adults for certification. You've taken the GRE there or something, and lots of people getting certified in different for different job placement. So you can take it twice at a Prometric a test center. It is most likely going to be during the day, so it may involve having to pull a student out of school. But it's easily to search, and like I searched where I live, and it was like, you could find multiple options, only, you know, 10 miles away or something. So there is an option there. One thing about the Prometric is that you don't have to worry about barking dogs and noisy little brothers or anything like that. But the one problem with it is it's just that like it's an adult setting that all the other test takers are, people working in, post collegiate degrees, and some students just feel weird in there. And so like, dropping off your 10-year-old or 13-year-old might not be like um they might feel like they're really out of place, and that can be a an issue as well. Just in terms of like it's not going to feel like a school. It's on there. But the Prometric, it's going to run well. It's going to be, it's going to be quiet, and so those, I think it is a little bit better of a system than the at home at this juncture. Um, so just a quick aside on elementary level. So elementary is for third and fourth graders. It's not as popular as the other tests. There is no home per metric testing for the elementary level. I guess they figured the kids that young, that would just really just be too much to put an 8-year-old in there. Um, and so the elementary level starts in December, so it's later testing, which kind of shows you that they're not taking it as much of an importance as the middle and upper ones. And a student can take it twice in person as well as one flex test. So there is an elementary flex test. Um, some regions don't really use it at all. It's something to really, I think I might tutor once a year or something. It's not a big business or big demand for that, I should say. So the rest of what we're going to talk about is middle and upper because they have the same structure and strategies and very similar scoring. Obviously, there's going to be differences in materials and stuff and how they're covered. But by and large, you can kind of use the same strategies for middle and upper. It's really obviously some of the vocabulary might be more difficult on the upper, but that's harder to quantify. It's definitely there are math concepts that are exclusively for the upper level. So you can see test structure. And I've got slides for all these things and some example questions. So as you start off with an essay that's unscored, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's going to be a quantitative, which is just their word for math, and then reading comprehension, verbal, which include synonym and analogy questions, a second quantitative that's just more of the same, and then experimental, where it does test all subjects, but that is unscored, but students can't opt out of it. So the essay is, something where it's you're given two prompts, and for the middle level, one's a narrative, which is basically the beginning of a story, like it's the first phrase, and then the other one will be personal, like a personal reaction to for something or telling something that happened in your life. For the upper level, it's gonna have a similar personal prompt, but the other one's gonna be analytical, where you're like talking about things beyond your own experience, like what makes the school the best, or what should society do about this issue. And so the essays are not scored, but they're sent to schools for evaluation. And so it's important to kind of think of it as making a first impression. And they may look at a essay that is submitted from the regular application and then the SSAT essay, and if there's a big discrepancy, that may show that the one that was in the application may not be authentic in there. And I think it's also loosely used as like a psych eval in the sense of like, is this student putting forth, concerning ideas or behavior, right? So I always tell my students, I say it's playfully, but like, don't be weird. It's something where you don't want to have like a concern that like that over the content you've written. All right, up next is math and quantitative. So a calculator is not permitted on the SSAT. There is a caveat on that if you can get an accommodation for a calculator, but even that has to be like a basic four function. And so for most students they should not be using a calculator when they're taking the test. And so it's going to have some logical reasoning and problem solving. There's not a lot of computation in there. It is not a test of like ruling arithmetic. It's really about solving things efficiently and logically, and understanding like some of the underpinnings of math. But they're definitely gonna have some arithmetic, algebra, and geometry concepts in there. Um, and stuff is that only shows up on the upper level is there's definitely some linear equations, more advanced exponents and negative and fractional stuff, a little bit of polynomial factoring, and then more of the spatial reasoning, so just like understanding like how transformations or reflections of shapes. So good math strategies, like, hey, read the question carefully. Most of the questions are going to be word problems. Write down your work, don't skip steps, set things up. And then I think one of the best advice is, double check, did you answer the question asked? And so that would be, like the wrong answers are oftentimes things that are true, but they're the answers to different questions. And so this is, you make sure that, if you found X, that's great, but maybe they wanted the value of Y, or maybe they wanted the value of X plus Y, and to not fall for those traps. So we got a couple of example questions here, and we can work on those. So it says, we've got some straight up geometry. If a circle has an area of 16 pi inches, what is the length in inches of the diameter? Okay, so we want to know we're solving for the diameter. And so students are expected to know the formula on here. So we need to know that area of circle is pi r squared, and they were nice enough to um, put this in terms of pi. So we can plug in 16 pi for our area, and then we can solve for r. So we get that, and then pi r squared, and we can divide the pi's out, and they will cancel out, which leaves us with 16 equals r squared. And to undo a square, you want to take the square root on both sides. And so that means that r is 4. And a lot of students are going to pick a on there because we found r. And that's, like we found r, we found it, the radius is 4, and that's an answer choice. But we remember, go back to what are we solving for? And it asks us for the diameter. And so, we have to know that the diameter is twice the radius. Pretty easy stuff. But the actual answer is C, right? So there's one more step. And this is a good example of how they'll do it where there's an additional piece that you have to pay attention to. And they might test some guesstimation stuff. So here's some really gross arithmetic. But if you look at the answer choices, they're all pretty similar. So that means that we can kind of round some stuff, right? So we can just say this is actually 60,000. Close enough. And then we'll just round that down to 2,000. I'm going to make it as a fraction because it's easier to read. And then I can cross out some zeros, right? So there's like 3 zeros on the top and bottom I can get rid of. And that gives me 60 over 2, which is 30. And that's our answer. There's no reason to do this the long way, right? So it's being clever with the math given. So on the reading section, there's about 7 or 8 passages. It kind of vary to test, and about 5 to 6 questions per passage. And so it's going to be a mix of different kinds of passages. They didn't pick some kind of random stuff, and they don't give a lot of context for this. So you might be thrown into a Charles Dickens narrative, some excerpt, and the next thing might be talking about, about an interesting cactus and how, what it does, right? And there may be a poem as well. A poem is not a guarantee, but it is often found as one of the passages. In terms of, they like to ask questions about inference, things about tone. You need to watch out for, they may have a not accept question, might be a little bit of vocab in there, words and context. But it's kind of a classic reading comprehension. Though I think that the challenge is that the passages can be difficult, and they are very random, and you may be dealing with some Victorian era language. So what's some good strategies for this? I mean, reading carefully and actively, paying attention to the passage, summarizing things, moving through those is going to be the best way to understand it. It's going to go better if a student focuses on understanding the passage versus trying to just look at the questions and find the answers. They're going to get some of those questions right, but those generally going to get the easy questions right and not the hard ones. And so the easiest way to find to eliminate or to find the right answer is to look for wrong answers and the words that are not supported in the passage. And so kind of using process elimination there. And then know that like they're going to test a lot on tone. They like asking questions the author's tone is best described as. And they're also going to ask you questions about figurative language where the answer choices are simile, alliteration, personification. And they might ask you line 7 is an example of, and so you do have to know how to categorize those things. Then there's verbal. So it's going to have 30 synonym questions and then 30 analogy questions, and they're going to go easy to difficult per section. So if a student's getting kind of stuck on the synonym stuff and they're at question 20, it's probably best to move on to question 31 and start the analogies because the first 10 analogies are going to be pretty easy. So a synonym question has like no context for the word. It's just the single word, and then you have to pick the answer that matches. Analogies are going to test the relationships between words, and so that's going to have it where like you have to figure out that relationship on there. So we can kind of play with this. So we have the word objective, and I think what's interesting about objective is that objective has multiple meanings, right? It could be a noun, it can mean goal, um, but it is being. If you look at all the answer choices, we're using it as an adjective, right? And so we have to think about what an objective tone would be, which that would be something that doesn't show bias or is not subjective, right? And so we're just using it maybe a lesser meaning of objective, right? Um, but it's definitely not offensive, and it's not it shouldn't be conflicting. Neutral seems pretty good. That's kind of that wouldn't have a bias. Conclusive, not so great. Bias would be like kind of the antonym. So C is the best answer here. And then we have an analogy. It's concerned is to frantic, and we have analogies you want to make a sentence. And what I would say is like concerned is less than frantic, and so like it's going in degree where it's like frantic is more, right? So is frigid less than balmy? That's not a very good match. They're kind of different. Is furious less than perturbed? No, that reverses the order. And so that doesn't work great. Is content less than elated? Yeah, I think so. Is sad less than perplexed? Not a real good match there, right? I don't think that there's not a big lot. So like if it's illogical, we can just get rid of it. And is ecstatic less than reserved? No. I mean, that's not a great match, but definitely ecstatic is a stronger word. Um, so only C matches on this one. All right, and then the experimental section is just going to draw problems from each part, and it's not scored. Just got to do it. I have much more to say about it. It's going to be a couple math questions, a couple verbal questions, a little maybe one passage. Like that's all it is. Okay, so we have to get to the scoring here. Scoring is kind of weird on the SSAT. So the middle and upper have different ranges where middle caps out per section at 770 while upper caps out at 800. It's kind of similar to how the PSAT is to the SAT, if that analogy makes sense. But I would not like that analogy doesn't work too great because if you look at if you're trying to compare SSAT scores to SAT, they are different scales because the SAT scores goes all the way down to 200, right? So a 550 on the SAT is like that's an average score, right? And honestly, a college bound score. Where 550 on the SSAT, especially on the upper level, is like a very low score. And so you have to kind of change your thinking because the range is much different, even though they cap out at the same total number there. So one of the most important things on the SSAT is that it has a guessing penalty. And if you miss a question, it subtracts a quarter point from the score. Where if you leave the question blank or omit it, it does not affect your score. You just keep it 0. So this is, I think, the only test that I can think of that, at least especially at primary or secondary school, that still has a guessing penalty. All the other ones have basically gone away with it. SAT doesn't do it. AP test doesn't do it. Yeah, GRE doesn't do it. So this is a something that's very old-fashioned, and um, students need to strategically answer. So they don't know, and that's likely to happen, especially on on verbal. If you don't know what the words mean, you really can't answer it, right? It's not going to come to you. And so, or there's definitely going to run into some math that if it's a concept the student's never seen. It is just better to leave it blank. Students can still do well on this test and not get a perfect score, a perfect raw score, I should say. So they also do percentiles. The percentiles are what schools care about. It's important that these percentiles only reflect what the students taking the test. It is not a nationwide ranking. Um, the students taking this are well prepared, motivated students, and it's like it's something where like you should expect percentiles to be a little bit rougher than like than on than norm. I see a lot of parents get students always have great marks. Um, teachers love them, all the things, and then they get the percentiles, and it's like 40th percentile. But I think as part of this is just that students are not familiar with this test. This test, to be honest, is kind of a dinosaur. It's an old-fashioned test. It is a 20th century IQ test at its core, and it's not what's taught in schools. You can say, well, why do all these schools care about it and stuff? The honest answer is it shows if you're good at testing, and if you're good at being clever, which there is, even though the structure of the SAT is really different than the SSAT at this point. Uh, a student who does well in the SSAT will likely do well in the SAT or the ACT, just because that the logic of these tests clicks, and so they're answering multiple choice questions. There's a similarity there. Um, and so it really is showing how good you are at this kind of testing, and nothing else. Um, you will find that most schools will not offer a percentile cutoff, and part of this is just of understanding what the SSAT is in terms of general campus building. Um, they need they need a campus, and they need a culture, and they need other things. SAT are like is one component on there, but it's not the everything. It's like they're going to need athletes, and I was talking to a school of them. I'll leave the name out, but the name that they needed uh, girls to play volleyball, and that they're running out of that. And so a for family, that like, oh, like that might be your ticket, and because the girls good at volleyball, right? Um, Now, obviously, having a stronger SSAT score makes things a little bit better. But there are like these other demands of a school besides just academics and besides just testing, right? Um, I think the big difference here is that um, those skills of like being good at athletics or musician or some other skill, this would be a lot harder to develop within like a couple month period. But I think that most students, if they apply themselves and study the SSAT like in a period of matter of months, like they can improve their score. And so it is like it's the one thing that you really can change, right? Um, if it's much harder to become a star athlete, and needs a lot more time, and then getting a competent score on the SSAT. So I think it's good to kind of think of it in that way. It's a thing that a student can change with hard work. So study plans there, make sure the spaces could fill up. Know which type of test you're taking. I would recommend starting with paper, keeping the flex or any of those things for testing honestly in January, or even early February, if it's just like you're close and you need a couple more percentile points to kind of to make your application look better. Like that's what I would go with. But um, so really start like taking by the November test is good. It's the time to do that is now. Like it's time to register for that. And if not the November test, then certainly the December test. It's time to get this going. Um, the one thing I've noticed is that like sometimes in paper-based testing, you're gonna have a Scantron, a little bubble sheet. Students don't have any experience with that anymore. Everything's done digitally, or they don't have that kind of standardized testing. So making sure they just know how to do answer on bubbles, I like it's one of the things I wouldn't have thought of, but I've seen some kids just like really don't know. They like maybe have to do that with even just with practice, like for homework, like building that those little um small muscle, like that are needed for that. Um, and then for computer testing, I mean, basically to know the format of the rules on there, like knowing that you have to look straight ahead and you can only look down, and that you need to like you only get two sheets of paper, and so use that carefully. You can't just go grab more paper. You just kind of just know what that does. Unfortunately, the computer based thing does not offer any kind of assistance in terms of like annotation or highlighting or anything like that. That's a very basic online interaction thing. Make sure students understand the guessing penalty. That's the first thing I talk to students about is, and explain it to them, and take the time for them to understand. Um, in terms of timeline, plan tests more than once, but you want to try to finish by end of January. There were like the early February tests, but like you're getting into last stitch things. They do have testing all throughout the spring, but that's really like wait list kind of thing, or student family moves or something into a new district. It's not common. I don't see any SSAT tutoring or ICE tutoring in the spring. Um, Same thing, like it's better to go slow and steady, but I mean, we're getting where the time of action is now. The time to start is now. Vocab to take a while to learn. I would push vocabulary daily, reviewing things, working with word lists, working there's all kinds of vocabulary um, free programs online, like Free Rice, which is a great site, which actually donates to charity. Um, you know, Reading older books and getting more familiar with the older language, going back into the Victorian era, I think is important. And then, for core math concepts, I think one of the biggest ideas, especially for the middle level, is like the relationship between fractions, decimals, percentages, ratios, and probability. And they're all kind of the same thing. Understanding that is a core idea. Making sure that like, they're familiar with geometry formulas because they're not going to give any help with that. But these are all important things macro stuff on the test. Um, I don't want to spend too much time, but because people sometimes ask this, there's a thing called the character skills snapshot. When you buy the SSAT, you get a free option to this. You take it at home. Basically it's a quiz. It tests these things. It's a way to give feedback on the emotional, intellectual abilities of the student. They do it in three scores of emerging, developing, and demonstrating. And there's two different kinds of questions there. Forced choice. We have to make a choice, or situational judgment, like what's the best option. And this is the idea of the forced choice. So you say the one you like and the one you dislike. This one, there's typically not a bad answer, but they're kind of priorities or how you would deal with certain situations, like where um, how do you view a certain thing. And then this character snap sheet, which is um, like there's an issue, and then how do you handle it? And there's usually like a wrong answer. Like there's like a blunt answer. Um, but whether a school wants it or not, it really is up to the school. It's just something that once you buy the SSAT and have the account, you can take it for free, and you don't need to schedule it. You can just start it. I think it takes 30 minutes for a student to go through. Okay, so we're switching over to the ISEE. If that's what you're looking for, we're there. So the levels are a little bit different. The big difference is that like for like the SSAT fifth would be in middle, but here it's in lower. There's even an elementary level of like first to third grade, but not again just like the lower level, the elementary level for the SSAT, not used real heavily. It tends to be used for middle and upper. They're floated with ERB. And same thing. It's like some regions use it's very strong, and so others it's not. Um, so what they have for their testing is fewer options, and then that's going to be one of um, our main ideas here. So there's a IC at home testing that they offer. They have Prometric as well, and then they also have paper-based testing at select locations. So the timeline on this is way different. Um, so they have three testing seasons. They have fall, which is almost going to be over. We got a month, right? And then the student can take one test in fall, and they can take one test in winter. They have a spring summer season, but no one uses it. And so that's really only a wait list or some unusual situation. So that means that a student who takes the IC can take it twice, and they need to take that first test before the end of November. Uh, there's also no nationwide testing times, and so you have to go and look. And I was surprised, like I was working with a family in the greater the New York City tri-state area, And I was like, within that options, they were like, there was not a lot of times you could take it. Um, and we're talking for like a big market. So uh, trying to find a paper or trying to a paper test state may be difficult and may involve some travel um, in there for certain students. Depending on how common the test is. Um, so you definitely should plan for a fall and winter test date. And like, if you have not signed up for the fall one, uh, I would do that now. Well, at the end of my site. Um, so that home is offered like all the time, which is great. It's offered like almost every weekend, or almost every weekday and some weekends. So they where the paper test is very limited at the IC. They've really like the at home is um like too many options. Like they offer almost every day. It's similar in that like secure program, live proctor and stuff. They use a different system. I've heard less bad things about it than the at home, but I'm also a little bit wary, especially since you only get two times you could possibly test. And so to have like if there's a technical issue and lose that opportunity could be really impactful. But the Prometric, same thing. It'll work. You can set it up. Um, there's just an issue of like again, some students are going to feel unfamiliar in that testing environment. Um, and why could you do it? I mean, it's distraction free. It'll work. The only thing, the caveat is that some students are going to feel weird on being the only kid there. Um, yeah. So paper-based testing again, no nationwide testing. You have to look it up. And if you need to test an ISEE, you need to look this up and find a test day, and hopefully, the ones in November are still have spaces because of obviously they're only have so many seats available. Okay, so just like we did with SSAT, we're gonna go through the structure on here. So there's similarities and differences. The so it starts off a verbal section, and then it goes to quantitative, and this is a different kind of math than math achievement later. Um, so quantitative is more logic-y math, and then there's reading comprehension, which should make sense. And then the math achievement is like testing harder math, like seeing how much a student has known, and then it ends with an essay rather than begins with one. So it the verbal questions only 40 of those. Synonyms are the same thing, but then instead of analogies, they have sense completions, which we used to be on the old SAT, though I guess SAT kind of brought them back as the words and context questions now. Um, but same sort of things, here difference we have, for answer choices, but we can use some roots. So we know that pair means equal and dis means negative, so it's something that's not equal. And then agreement doesn't mean that. Inequity does mean that. Loneliness isn't not equal. Illusion. So it would be B. Went through that a little quick, but part of it's that we did synonyms earlier. Then we have blank. So these are logic questions. So Tyler was a notorious blank, and then it tells us what he was. He always waited to the last minute to start his assignments. So could he be a notorious debater? Well, that doesn't mean being late on assignments. An activist, that's not last minute to start assignments. Combatant, that's not last minute. Procrastinator, yes, that is literally the definition of being a procrastinator. And so choice D is best. So for the first section of math, it's going to be first multiple choice questions that are focusing more on logic and analysis than like on difficult concepts. And then they're going to have quantitative reasoning questions, which used to be on the SAT many years ago, been on the GRE off and um, on there, where you have to figure out which quantity is greater if possible. Um, like the SSAT, a calculator is not permitted. It's actually a stronger calculator policy. You can't get an accommodation for a calculator where you can get one for an SSAT. So kind of like puzzle math here. Um, they say that a in between these hashtags is that 2a squared plus 6a. What's the value of 4 in there? And so this is just function notation, where the a's go here and there. And so all we have to do is put our 4 in there. So it becomes 2, 4 squared plus 6 times 4. And so we get 2 times 16 plus 24. And then we distribute the 2, we get 32 plus 24, which is going to give us 56. So math isn't too hard, but you have to figure out the logic of it. And here we have to think about, they do test a good bit of statistics on here. Things about understanding, like making sure you know mean, median, mode, and range. Um, so I think for time's sake, we'll skip our the fun of the range thing here. We need to talk about these weird quantitative reasoning questions. The answers are always the same. There's going to be 2 columns. Quantity A is greater, quantity B is greater. They are equal, or you can't know. And so like, when you have variables, thinking about the different kinds of numbers it could be is really important on this. So on this one, and we'll just do the first one here. So x squared x cubed, you might say, oh yeah, column B is greater because obviously that is a greater power, but there's no limitations on what x can be, right? So x could equal 0, and then they're actually equal, or x could be 1/2, and then when you get fractions get smaller when you raise them to higher powers. You get 1/4, and then you get 1/8. Or x could be a negative number, which then if it's a negative number, x squared is going to become positive, but x cubed is going to stay negative, right? And so that would have to be choice D. We don't know because there's no limitation on what x can be. And then we have one with dealing with some geometry, but we don't have any figures, right? So it would be translating and writing out what these things look like, and figuring out the differences in parameter. We'll skip that one for time's sake, because we're running a little low on time, but that's all right. We'll get through it. Passages, 6 passages, 6 questions each. These are pretty easy as things go. They're like it tends to be passages just straightforward explaining stuff. And in a contemporary style, it is not hard. A lot of questions maybe on structure and purpose, main idea of the passage, something you expect. But I would say, like, if we're going to compare the SSAT to ISEE, the reading is pretty easy in the ISEE, especially compared to the SSAT. So same stuff, read actively, something. There's rid of some redundant slides here. To watch out for, like, the non-set questions, and then if they ask vocab and context questions, which they may ask several times, make sure that you use the passage and don't just like, I know what that word means, because it may be used figuratively. And then math achievement is, it's 47 questions, so it's a lot of stuff, and it's meant to push students outside of their comfort zone or things that they have covered in school. They are looking for exceptionalism. And so they're asking 8th graders, like, questions on trigonometry or matrices, like the stuff that you would see like in pre-calculus. Not exclusively. This section definitely goes easy to hard, but it is seeing if a student's good at math beyond what they're expected to be. And so we have things with like using this is testing difference of squares. There is an easy way to do it, though. You have to know that x squared minus y squared always factors to x plus y, x minus y. That's a knowledge thing, a common pattern in factoring. And once you know that, you can substitute in 40 for this whole x squared minus y squared term. You can substitute in 10 for x plus y, and then we're left with x minus y. You divide both sides by 10, you get that x minus y equals 4. And so it's actually really easy if you know that the math concept. And then it's going to fill it with an essay. You get 1 prompt. It's a very open-ended question. Do you agree with something like the best things in life are free, and then just like roll with it. Like the SSAT, the essays are not scored, but they are sent to the schools. One weird thing about the ISE essay is that if you're taking the paper test and you have to write it out, you need a black or blue pen. You're not allowed to use pencil. So, it also means that you can't erase stuff. You can cross things out, but it is more a kind of a strange limitation. Where on the SAT, you write with the pencil, and so you can erase things like normal. Okay, so the scoring on this, there's no guessing penalty on IC, so students would definitely answer all questions, for sure. The scale scores are weird. They go from 760 to 940. I think that's one of the weirdest scales I've seen on any standardized testing. Um, and then you also get a percentile score and a Stanine score. So percentiles are definitely important. Though a lot of times schools will just use Stanines for simplicity. And this is what Stanine scales are consistent. So they're basically simplifying percentiles into groupings. But what's important is that they're not one to one, right? Like if you look at like 5 and 6, there's a lot of percentiles in each of those, and so it's hard to move from a 5 to a 6. And then you get up to like 9, it's just like it's a very small section there. So it's important to recognize that like it's not, if you have 90 above, you get a 90 above on percentiles, you get a 9 on stand nines. It's not that, it is its own scale. Um, so study plan, some of this again is going to be uh similar to what was said on the SSAT. Um, but spaces really fill up for ICs because there are fewer of them, and you have to look for stuff. So if you need to take it, if you're applying to school these IC, it's the end of October. You need to test by end of November, and the time to do that is now. The computer-based, the at-home testing, there's tons of options. Like that's pretty low stress of finding when you can do it. And that may be the only option, quite honestly, if you're testing this light. And same thing, make sure you know the rules of it and know how to bubble. Fluent states is the best approach, but we're running low on time. For starting the IC. Reviewing geometry, algebra, and then also statistics. There's a lot of statistical terms on the ISE. Knowing how to read box plots and stem and leaf and all that kind of stuff. If students want to like push for a high score, they may have to learn some like the basics of some math they've never done. So the eighth grader might have to deal with logarithms or something just to get some of the fun the foundations there. Okay, so things that we're doing the first time this year, we're offering this SSAT and ICT essential class. They are separate classes because they are separate tests. And it's a 90-minute review. It has online instruction. It comes with a free practice test and a detailed score report that they can take on their own time. We got ones going. I know we have an SSAT one that's running literally Monday night, of next week there. So if you're ready to kind of get on board and start the process, you have to take a practice test. The practice in these essential classes is only available there. It's not redundant with anything else we have. So feel free to check that out. I think it's a good kickstart. Because we talked about there today that this is meant for the student um, uh, to be in, because it's talking to a student and giving them practice, and rather than me explain something quickly, it's actually okay, you have 10 minutes to finish these 8 problems or something like that. And we'd love to talk to you about anything. So if you have any interest in setting up an SSAT program or an ICA program or any other service, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to give us a call, and we want to make sure that supporting your student any way possible. So, uh, well, I appreciate everyone hanging out and chatting with me, and I will catch you later. Yeah, I'll have a good night.